This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Atelia Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China goes all out to tackle its hidden debt crisis, allowing local governments to issue an extra 6 trillion yuan, about $837 billion in bonds, and promising more support next year. A fishing boat sinks off the coast of South Korea's Jeju island. 2 people are dead, while 12 others are missing. And on a mission to balance relations with major powers, Indonesia's new president begins a 5-nation tour in China with a potential meeting in the US with President-elect Donald Trump to follow. And Sony logs an impressive 73% on-year jump in second quarter operating profit, led by its game and image sensor businesses. But it's leaving its annual profit forecasts unchanged. Also in East Asia tonight, South Koreans put up for adoption return home to search for long-lost parents. Unfortunately for many, the path is long and hard. China has unveiled a fresh round of fiscal support, boosting the aid package for its economy to 1.4 trillion as officials wrap a closely watched meeting in Beijing this week. It comes shortly after U.S. presidential nominee Donald Trump won the race to the White House and amid risks of more trade tensions between the world's top 2 economies. Well, the fiscal stimulus came in broadly in line with market expectations, but the Greater China markets ended the day in the red before the measures were announced. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng retreated more than 1%, trimming gains for the week. The Shanghai Composite lost 0.5%, while the second boss Shenzhen component ended 0.2% lower. China's renminbi weakened sharply against the dollar right after the announcement of the $1.4 trillion stimulus package. Onshore yuan fell by as much as 0.4%, below the 7.17 level to the dollar it is now. Well, the country's central bank set its daily fix for the currency at its lowest level since November at 7.16 yesterday after the Trump victory. CNA's Olivia Seong, she joins us live now from Beijing. Olivia, just give us a sense, the details from the stimulus measures announced today.
I'll tell you, well, the details are in. That's exactly what the market had been calling for a long time now. And initial reactions, some analysts are saying that it is in line with expectations. Some even saying it has exceeded their expectations. But a total 10 trillion yuan or 1.4 trillion US dollars to refinance local government debt has been approved. Now, this 6 trillion yuan debt swap was described by China's finance Minister Lan Fo-an at a news conference that I attended just a short while ago as the highlight of a series of incremental policies this year. This policy move had first been announced last month by him, but there was some disappointment when he did not give indication of the scale of it, instead saying that they had to go through the legal procedures first before that could be revealed. And now we are hearing the details. Asked about considerations for this debt swap and policy move, the finance minister said these included international and domestic development environments, the need to ensure a stable economic and fiscal operation, as well as the actual development situation of local governments. But why focus on local government debt? Maybe the question that some people have. Well, the finance minister said these moves are meant to help, quote, diffuse debt bombs, and estimating that at the end of last year, local governments had 14.3 trillion yuan, or about 2 trillion US dollars in hidden debt. Now, referring to off-balance sheet debt borrowing through companies and other local government financing vehicles. But the finance minister said there have been new challenges also since the start of this year, changes in the external environment, weak domestic demand, tax revenue falling short of expectations, and a drop in land transfer revenue. As we do know, the real estate industry has been in a slump for a long time now. All this has made it difficult for local governments governments to repay their off-balance sheet debt. So what is the expected impact of these policy moves, together with other measures, including tapping another 4 trillion yuan in new special local bond quota over 5 straight years? The finance minister said before 2028, the total amount of hidden debt is expected to be reduced from 14.3 trillion yuan to 2.3 trillion yuan. And this is also expected to reduce the interest payment burden by 600 billion yuan over the next 5 years, freeing up more cash for local governments to spend on salaries, construction projects, also meant to be a big move to help boost China's flagging economy. Ateli.
Well, many thanks for that. Olivia Seong speaking to us from Beijing. Well, there is much more to unpack. Well, let's keep this conversation going with our guest for this evening. And as well as Ronald Lim is also joining us.
Charlie.
So let's begin first with our guest there, Yunsuk. Just checking that she's there. All right, Yunsuk, we know that Beijing had an earlier signal that fiscal stimulus is coming, but, you know, as Olivia had mentioned, it was short on detail, frustrating investors. So essentially at this point, do you think investors are generally going to be happy with today's announcements?
I think that's a great question. Thanks for asking. I think it's really a mixed result today, and I'm not sure that all of the investors will feel happy, because there are two things that investors are watching. One is the amount of debt swap. As Olivia mentioned, it's 10 trillion or 12 trillion. However, the other thing that investors are watching is how much additional fiscal bond that the government is willing to take to stimulate the economy. However, the second part, as I mentioned, there's not much mentioning on the additional fiscal spending in details this time. So that's, I think, where the broader pessimistic come from.
Yes, Roland here. Not wanting to sound facetious, but how big is big enough for China's stimulus? I mean, the fiscal package now stands at 1.4 trillion US dollars. That's nothing to sniff at.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. So let's compare with 2009. During that period of time, 4 trillion stimulus package is equivalent to more than 10% of China's GDP. That's additional spending. So this time, even if it's 12 trillion or 10 trillion debt swap, it does not necessarily increase the macro leverage ratio, given it's just moving the off-balance sheet debt of the local government onto the balance sheet. So that does not necessarily mean the leverage ratio goes up, so that the central government has more room to spend to stimulate the economy, to turn things around. So that's the first point. And the second point is that how are they going to spend those money is a question that's really important with the broad sentiment. For example, most of the money will be used again for infrastructure investment or for purchase of the property inventories, which is good. I mean that, which is good for investment, and gradually it will translate into higher employment and income. However, there's no clear signal that it will be distributed directly to the household, like what's happening during the COVID-19 in the United States. This is something I think that will continue to disappoint the Chinese investors who are looking at a strong comeback of China's consumption sentiment. Yeah, so how they're going to spend the money and how much, yes.
So you seem to be suggesting it's not likely to change the trajectory of household consumption or private consumption, which is what the economy really needs.
I think, yeah, as I mentioned, the economy really needs is to boost domestic demand, especially at the consumption side. As I mentioned earlier, that most of the stimulus package or the additional fiscal support goes to the supply side. It could potentially exaggerate the potential overcapacity issue in certain industries, and that would translate into more trade conflict with the world. That's the first thing. And second thing is that if the domestic consumption cannot come back, which means that whenever there is an export shock, either because of tariff increase, that means that the producers within China couldn't find ways to absorb their inventory. That would dampening their profits, their revenue, and again, dampening private investment. So the most important thing I would say is to boost the consumer sentiment and to increase their expectation on their future income and their future asset revenue return. That's something that's really important. I think the government really need is to send more clear message that they will help the household to getting through the difficulties in this economic cycle. So I would expect it to see more consumer-related, household income-related policy to really comes out until we could find the sentiment goes up.
Yunsuk, this announcement was also made after the U.S. presidential election and with the incoming Trump administration threatening higher tariffs. Do you think China is perhaps saving their firepower for next year, maybe waiting until Trump's policies become clearer?
Yeah, exactly. I think I totally agree with you. I think today, the Ministry of Finance does send a very positive signal about fiscal policy next year, which is going to be released their details in March, the 2 sessions every year. So he sets a very positive tone, but exactly how much additional fiscal support they're going to adopt will be a different question. I do believe they'll wait and see the Trump administration how are they going to design their new China policy in the coming months so that China could have a clear idea about how much additional money they're willing to spend within the next 3 years. Because people are not expecting the U.S.-China relation to see a structural improvement in the long run. So as you mentioned, I do think the government will be very careful regarding how much additional policy room they're going to use for the economic cycle this round.
According to your research group, though, how big of an impact do you expect the tariffs to have on Chinese goods? After all, I mean, boosting exports has been one of the growth drivers for China this year.
Yeah, that's a good question. According to our estimation, if Trump's administration imposed 30% tariff on Chinese product in general, that would reduce China's GDP growth by 0.3 to 0.4 percentage point within the next 2 years, I mean 25 and 26. However, as we can see that if the Congress is being controlled by the Republican, that means that it's potentially there's a higher risk that the tariff could go higher and it could come much earlier. That means that there's a significant downside risk to China's export next year in 2026, which means that I do expect the government will come up with a stronger fiscal policy, especially focus on consumer goods spending. Yeah.
Also, Yunsuk, we've got support real estate investment, we've got local government debt, boosting bank lending to the real economy and supporting consumers. I mean, which of these by far do you think is the most important pillar of the stimulus measures?
I think the stimulus, the most important thing in the government mind, I think the top thing is actually to manage market expectation again. So you can see that throughout from the December to now, there are several press conference hosted by the government officials, and they keep sending the positive signal to the market. So I think manage market expectation to domestic investors and foreign investors are the top priority of the government. The second priority is to reduce systematic risk in the banking sector and among the local government debt issues. And another most important thing is the property market, because they really see the deflation pressure come from the property sector. So and then again, dealing with the deflation cycle to change people's expectation about future inflation so that they can accelerate their the spending decisions now is something that they're looking at. Yeah, so I mentioned 4 things. So basically, these are at the top of the government priority and their agenda. That's how I see.
Thanks so very much for sharing with us. I really appreciate your time and thoughts. Yunsuk, Principal China Economist Intelligence Unit, as well as Roland Lim. Well, I guess we'll be seeing you a little later for the business updates. Next, Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto is on a trip to China, his first visit since taking office. He will hold talks with Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang. Mr. Prabowo is expected to focus on economic issues with China as both countries brace for the potential impact of promised tariffs from the incoming Trump administration. Well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China was willing to work with Indonesia and take this visit as an opportunity to consolidate high-level political mutual trust and deepen comprehensive strategic cooperation. Beijing said that the visit reflected the importance the Indonesian leader places on strengthening bilateral relations. The disputes in the South China Sea are not expected to overshadow the top agenda item, which is economic cooperation. After his trip to China, Mr. Prabowo will fly to Washington before making stops in Peru, Brazil, and the United Kingdom. Mr. Prabowo has hailed an immense potential of relations with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. But with an incoming Trump administration, questions remain on how tariffs might impact Indonesia. Mr. Trump has a long-standing America First policy, and he has vowed to impose blanket tariffs of up to 20% on imports from all countries. There are also concerns Mr. Trump may put pressure on trade organizations that will lead to ramifications in Asia. But some experts say the effect of tariffs on Indonesia may be muted, as domestic consumption accounts for more than half of what the country produces. At least 2 South Korean nationals have died after a fishing boat sank off the coast of Jeju Island. An emergency task force for rescue operations has been set up as a search is ongoing for a dozen others who remain missing. Well, the incident took place at about 4:30 a.m. local time this morning when the Coast Guard received a distress call that the 129-ton boat was sinking 24 kilometers off Byangdo Island. 16 Korean nationals and 11 foreigners were on board. The Coast Guard says the boat that was out at sea to catch fish had suddenly capsized when crew members were transferring their catch to another vessel. And at the time, all but 2 members of the crew were working on the deck.
이 사고 원인은 현재 조사 중에 있으며 현재까지 인명 피해는 승선 인원 총 27명 중에 15명이 지금 구조를 했습니다. 15명 구조 중에 심정지 2명, 경상 13명이고 나머지 12명에 대해서는 현장에서 해경에서 지금 구조 활동에 있습니다.
South Korean President Yunsuk has instructed officials to use all available resources to rescue the missing crew, while also stressing the need to ensure the safety of the rescue workers. Hong Kong has issued a T1 warning as Typhoon Yining nears the territory. Yining is now within 800 kilometers of Hong Kong. Although it's not forecast to make landfall in the city, the combined effect with a northeast monsoon is expected to bring showers over the weekend. Well, elsewhere, cleanup is underway in the northern Philippines, where Yining did make landfall. The typhoon brought floods and landslides to the nation's most populous island, Luzon. Inter-island ferries, cargo services, and domestic flights in the northern provinces have been suspended, while schools have been shut. Nearly 40,000 people took shelter in government-run facilities, but so far there have been no reported casualties. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Sony's gaming segment giving a lift to its Q2 operating profit, rising by a whopping 73%. Nissan Motor shares fall a day after unveiling plans to cut 9,000 jobs. Hello again. It's time now for your business update with Roland. And Roland, I believe Sony is seeing some pretty good Q2 numbers.
That's right, Oteli. Sony's profits jumped in the second quarter thanks to stronger sales in gaming, music, and imaging sensors. Operating profit for the September quarter soared to almost $3 billion. That's up 73% from a year earlier, beating analyst estimates. Second quarter revenue grew 3% to $19 billion. Sony's businesses include games, music, movies, and chips. The yen's weakness against the dollar and euro had a positive impact on the takings in those key sectors. Sony has been working to lower its reliance on the core PlayStation business segment. That's 4 years into the latest hardware generation. But the game segment did beat expectations, both hardware and software sales, selling a better than expected 3.8 million PlayStation 5 units in the quarter. Hit titles like Black Myth: Wukong also bolstered earnings. The earnings release comes a day after the PlayStation 5 Pro console hit the shelves with a price tag that has raised eyebrows among gamers. The new console is aimed at preventing defections to rival platforms during the year-end shopping season. Sony is maintaining its profit forecast of $8.5 billion for the current year to March, but revised its sales forecast upwards slightly. Nissan Motor, on the other hand, not doing so well. Shares tumbling to near four-year lows a day after the Japanese automaker revealed plans to cut some 9,000 jobs and slashed its full-year operating profit forecast by 70%. Now, they slumped as much as 10% at one point before closing out the day 6% in the red. Japan's third biggest automaker announced various cost-cutting measures to cope with the tougher car industry conditions as well as to address internal weaknesses. Like many global car makers, Nissan is struggling in China, where BYD and other domestic rivals are winning market share with affordable electric vehicles and petrol-electric hybrids. Now, it is also challenged in the US, where it lacks a line of hybrids, just as that type of vehicle is in strong demand. Nissan's restructuring is the latest chapter in a long-running attempt to revitalize its business. It never fully recovered from 2018's ousting of former chairman Carlos Ghosn and the scaling back of its partnership with Renault. Japanese chipmaker Kioxia aims to list on the Tokyo Stock Exchange between December and June of next year. According to the Nikkei, Kioxia will use a new IPO process that only became available in Japan last year. Under the new process, Kioxia will submit a securities registration statement to the authorities before the board approves the listing. And this will shorten the time from approval to public listing and make it less susceptible to fluctuations in the stock market. Kioxia had aimed to list by last month, but a slump in the semiconductor sector had meant it could not gain the market valuation it had expected. The company is aiming for a market cap of around $6.5 billion. Kioxia, of course, the world's third biggest maker of NAND flash memory used for data storage. It became independent from Toshiba back in 2018, though the Japanese conglomerate still holds a 41% stake. Kioxia now owns 56% by a special purpose vehicle formed by private equity giant Bain Capital as well as South Korea's SK Hynix. East Asian equities extending gains, tracking another Wall Street record after the Federal Reserve cut interest rates and on prospects of market-friendly policies from a Trump administration. The Nikkei 225 added 0.3%. That's up 4.1% for the week, its best week in 6. The Kospi, however, did edge lower as auto and e-commerce stocks put a drag on the index, but for the week, it's still in positive territory. A similar story for Asian currencies, reversing earlier gains after the Fed failed to signal a pause in rate cuts for the near term. Japanese yen trading around that 153 level, and that's the weakest it's been since July. Korean won is weaker against the greenback by nearly 0.5%. Now, Korea's finance minister said it will respond to market volatility if it is excessively heightened. And that is the latest in business, Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, a taboo subject. Once the world's largest exporter of babies for adoption, South Korea now wants to reform the system and encourage more within the country to adopt. China unveils a $1.4 trillion plan to revive its sluggish economy. Beijing will authorize local governments to refinance crushing debts that have left some cities unable to pay their bills. At least 2 people have died after a fishing boat sank off the coast of South Korea's Jeju island. A search is underway to find a dozen others still missing. And Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto is in China for his first official visit. Economic talks will be on the forefront when he meets with President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang, as both countries brace for potential tariffs from the incoming Trump administration. South Korea was once the world's largest exporter of babies for adoption. Now, these infants, now grown up, are returning to find their roots. But for many, the search is long and futile. Cases of children being taken away falsely recorded as orphans and given new identities have come to light. Well, the government is now trying to reform the system. And CNA's senior career correspondent, Yunsuk, has this report.
These two Korean sisters are meeting face to face for the first time in nearly 40 years. They lived all their lives not knowing they have a sister. 38-year-old Dara Hanan was adopted by an American family in the early 1980s, while her elder sister Ha Ji-won was sent to Belgium around the same time. It was only a few months ago that they were notified about a sister match through a DNA testing company.
It's a little overwhelming. I just landed, so I'm still just trying to get used to.
Also overwhelmed. It's been a long journey. It's been a couple of months that's been overwhelming and being a lot and being separated. So we're happy that finally we have our piece together.
The sisters reunited in Seoul in October as they began their search for their biological parents.
If that's not a success, at least we found each other and we're gonna have some nice time together.
We asked what they would like to say if they found them.
I would like to meet you, but I understand if by any circumstances it would not be possible.
Yeah, you said it well.
Yeah?
Yeah. We love you and we miss you, but we understand if it's not the right moment.
These two sisters are not alone in their search for answers about their past. This bakery is run by Christine Panel, who was born in South Korea and sent to the U.S. for adoption when she was about 3 years old. In 2020, she left the U.S., where her 4 children live, and moved to Seoul to find her mother.
I really have this big plan that this sugar mama ends up like all over Korea, not just here in Gangsa-gu. And if I can get famous, maybe that will help me find my family.
Her bakery, which serves American food, a reflection of her years growing up in the U.S., has also become a second home of sorts for adoptees looking for their birth families in South Korea, as they are each other's source of support in their search, which is often fruitless. Driven by poverty, South Korea used to be the world's largest source of babies for adoption. It started with the unwanted babies that Korean women had with Western, mostly American soldiers during the Korean War. But the practice soon expanded to poor families, orphanages, and unwed mothers, as the business reportedly brought millions of dollars into South Korea. Overseas adoptions peaked in 1985, when nearly 9,000 babies were sent abroad. But the numbers gradually fell as the South Korean government promoted domestic adoption. Last year, among the 229 Korean children adopted, 79 were sent abroad because adoption agencies could not find homes for them here in South Korea. Yining, a member of the Gyeonggi Province Assembly, has 3 children. She and her husband adopted their youngest, Sonyu, when he was 5 months old. She hopes more Koreans will warm up to the idea of adoption, which is a taboo subject here.
혈연 중심이 제가 개인적으로 느낄 땐 그게 되게 강하다는 생각이 들어요. 그래서 친족 관계라든지 뭐 이런 것도 되게 중요하게 생각하고 입양에 대해서 되게 뭔가 숨기는 것들이 많고 되게 안 좋게 보는 시선이 많으니까 그걸 드러내기 어려워하는 분들이 계세요.
She is hopeful this will change with the government set to implement reforms and take over the adoption process currently managed by private agencies in July next year. But the changes come too late for these adoptees. They believe the government should also take responsibility for their cases and help them search for their biological parents and find answers to the questions about their roots that they have carried with them throughout their lives. Yunsuk, CNA, Seoul.
For more, let's chat with our senior career correspondent, Yunsuk. Yunsuk, that's a remarkable story you did there. And I want to talk about the 2 Korean sisters. Can you just Tell us more about the challenges that they face in their search for each other, and also how DNA testing played a critical role in their reunion.
Well, yes, it is, Ateli. And, there are just so many similar stories out there that I didn't even know about. But, in general, adoptees here face lots of challenges. For one thing, is the language. Although they were born here in South Korea, a lot of them don't speak Korean. And so they're having a lot of difficulty looking through the papers or even talking to some of the people here. And also, they're not getting the full stories from the adoption agencies, which sent them overseas for adoption. Now, when they look at the adoption papers that they have, and they've started to do that, they've learned that many of the details on those papers have been fabricated, like the place they were born, sometimes their date of birth, or place where they were found, and even their surnames on the papers. And many times they found that their surnames would be changed. And so it's like those kind of information that they're lacking and they don't seem to have. And, while doing this story, to me, it just seems like the adoption agencies didn't want to leave any of the traces of their past so that these adoptees could not find their parents and other family members. But now, thanks to this global DNA companies out there, many of these adoptees are starting to do those DNA tests, and they're finding some of those family members which they didn't even know about in the past. And like those two sisters, there's Christine from the U.S. She also did a DNA test because she wanted to find her family members here in South Korea. But instead, she found out that she had a full sister living in Belgium, Kim Halin, and they also just reunited a few years ago after more than 40 years of being apart. Now, they haven't been able to find their parents yet, and so many of the adoptees here that I've spoken to say at least they're very grateful that the DNA testing companies are out there, because now it is helping them find their siblings and other members of the family members living on the other side of the world.
Yeah, I guess Christine and the two Korean sisters we featured there are the lucky ones. Many are still awaiting a reunion. And Yunsuk, South Korea's history of international adoptions is complex, is often troubled. But help us understand this then, because the government now, they're planning these reforms of the adoption system, and it aims to address the concerns of adoptees. But to what extent do you think that's going to make a big impact?
Well, as of now, it's really unclear what the South Korean government plans to do or how it's going to help these adoptees like the two sisters, Christine, and all the others out there who are seeking more information about the past to try and find their birth parents. We don't really know what the South Korean government plans to do about them. But here in South Korea, there is this agency called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was set up to investigate some of the past human rights violations. That could be something that happened during the Korean War or when South Korea was under military dictatorships in the 1960s to 1980s. Now, this Truth and Reconciliation Commission is also investigating thousands of adoption cases, and officials investigating this have said that their investigations show that many of the documents have been fabricated, like describing the baby or this infant as orphans, when they did have parents here in South Korea who were alive and even looking for them. And in fact, there's this one mother I met. Her name was Han Tae-soon. She recently came forward with her story, and she is suing the South Korean government, an orphanage, and an adoption agency because apparently her daughter went missing in 1975 when she was about 4 years old. Now, this mother and whole family spent all their lives looking for this missing daughter since the day she went missing. She reported to the police, had posters of her up everywhere, but couldn't find her. And it was only in 2019, more than 40 years later, that she was able to reunite with her daughter here in South Korea. And talking to her daughter at the time, she said that her daughter remembers everything that happened. And she told her mother that this woman came up to her when she was playing with her friends near her house, said that her family didn't want her anymore, and took her hand and put her in a train. And when she woke up from this train ride, she was crying, and someone took her to a police station. But instead of trying to find her parents, apparently she was sent to an orphanage and later sent to the United States. And, Tilly, there are just so many other similar stories like this about how mothers were told by their doctors just after giving birth that the babies had died. And decades later, they found out the babies were alive and they've just been sent overseas for adoption. So I think this is something that the South Korean government needs to really investigate. I'm not sure how they're going to tackle this, what it's going to do, but hopefully it will it'll be able to find some of the answers that many of the adoptees are looking for.
Really heartbreaking stories to hear there. Well, thanks very much for that, CNA Senior Korea Correspondent Lim Yunsuk. And of course, you can catch the full CNA Correspondent episode on South Korea's baby exports on CNA.Asia and on YouTube. Right, time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the U.S. Science Envoy for Artificial Intelligence tells us what's being done to more accurately model the nascent technology for the region. And it's the last day of the Singapore FinTech Festival. We examine some of the possible solutions to the nearly $2.5 trillion gap between demand for SME financing and its supply in East Asia. Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong is concerned about rising friction between U.S. and China following Donald Trump's victory in this week's presidential election. And as the rivalry between the two world superpowers intensifies, Mr. Wong says that the U.S.-China relationship is in a more challenging place. And amid a more volatile world, things could easily go wrong.
All in all, it means a less hospitable environment, especially for small countries like Singapore. And that's why we have to work even harder to strengthen our network of friends and partners and to work with like-minded countries to shape international norms and rules and to find common ground on issues of shared concern.
Mr. Trump is on his second term as U.S. president. While he's no stranger to work with, PM Wong hopes that Mr. Trump's administration will be more involved in the Southeast Asian region, especially in terms of trade and security.
We would like to see more American economic engagement in Southeast Asia. Up to now, America remains the largest source of foreign direct investments in Southeast Asia, even more than China. But American trade lags behind China. And I think there's still a lot more that the U.S. MNCs can do and would be happy to do in Southeast Asia in both trade and investments. We want to facilitate that because we think it's good for the region.
China and the U.S. are among countries leading the AI charge, with both aiming to further develop their military resources. Well, CNA's Yasmin Yonkers spoke to Raman Chowdhury, the first U.S. Science Envoy for Artificial Intelligence, and she began by addressing the ethics of AI.
So what's called CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons, is a really big topic of conversation in certain communities. What I focus on, and I think what's quite important for a lot of people, first is to understand that this technology will not be as ubiquitous as we think it is unless we deal with actually very kitchen table issues like bias and discrimination. What we are trying to build AI models for example, is improving agricultural techniques, right? What will happen if these models are producing biased output because it doesn't understand the crops in the region or the language that's being spoken to it? I think that's more of an issue at home than this idea of some hacker making a nuclear weapon. I'll also add that, look, just because a model can tell you to do something doesn't mean you can go and do it, right? So let's say ChatGPT tells me how to make nuclear weapons. Where am I going to get weapons-grade plutonium to go make this? How am I going to go deploy it? So there is an added layer, again, of things we have thought through as it relates to national security, especially as it relates to weapons, cybersecurity, that have, in general, proven to be quite robust. But what I do encourage us to think about are the things we haven't addressed, which are the issues in society, again, bias, discrimination, that we have not really thought through. This is the data in our AI models, or more specifically as it relates to Asia, this is the data that's not in our AI models these models are trained on the data of the internet, which is the data of the Western world. So thinking through applications in Asia will require us thinking through what the data and the sources and the biases are that could be very Western focused or just not appropriate for use in this region.
Well, then how do you get a more accurate platform? What sort of effort has to be made in order to get the Asian model right?
So I work on something called red teaming. Red teaming is a way in which we bring in external experts, cultural experts, linguistic experts, sociologists to evaluate and test these models. So basically what we do is we set them in front of a computer and they ask the model questions. They try to elicit answers and they flag that. So what my organization does, we actually take that data and we work with companies to improve their models. Companies engage in this practice as well. Now, the world is a huge place. There are so many languages that are spoken. What they call coverage of these models in certain languages and cultures and communities are simply lagging because there's a big focus on the majority, the dominant cultures and societies. My organization, Humane Intelligence, works very closely with both experts and companies to help improve it. In fact, we just ran an exercise Monday and Tuesday as part of the GovTech conference with the IMDA, where we brought in 9 different nations to represent sort of a pan-Asia. We had Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. We had so many people in the room with this shared vision of how can we improve these models for the Asian perspective.
Okay, sounds fascinating, and it only means things will get better. I want to go back to the story of China and the US. They're increasingly using AI as a competitive tool. In fact, in May, the US Congress tried to pass a $32 billion AI fund to counter Chinese investment. Where does this race leave AI ethics?
That's a great question. I am not entirely sure. I worry a bit that we are hyper-focused on creating what's called a digital public infrastructure. Almost entirely, those investments go into data, models, training, but they don't go into AI security, safety, test, and evaluation. And this has been a problem for a very long time. Now, why does that matter? It actually matters because if you want to make a product that is actually useful, right, whether you are a government, a private entity, a startup, you need to do the appropriate testing. Otherwise, we cannot feel comfortable putting this product out in the world. At the end of the day, this product is about economic value. What is the value it's driving for you, for me, for every citizen? Otherwise, there is no purpose in government investing in it. Now, we can only demonstrate that if we can show that it's low risk, that it's high productivity, and that it's actually improving people's lives.
The high interest rate environment and tight regulations around financing have often made it hard for small and medium enterprises to manage the cash flow and invest in growth. Well, studies have found that the demand for SME financing far exceeds the supply, and that has led to some $5 trillion financing gap globally, nearly half of which is in East Asia. Well, e-commerce giant Amazon's Director of Payments APAC, Sujit Misra, spoke with CNA's Olivia Marzuki at the Singapore FinTech Festival about the solutions the company offers to bridge the SME financing gap.
I think, Amazon fundamentally is driven by 4 pillars. Those are customer experience and innovation, and then affordability and trust within the payments landscape. As we look at these 4 pillars, one of the things that we really try and solve is how do we solve for our customers? And customers doesn't mean those who are just shopping with us, but those who are also selling on our platform or using our platform for sales. Vendors, or as we call them, selling partners. So these selling partners, if you look at it, 60% of our sales globally is now coming from these selling partners, most of them being small and medium enterprises. So we have a genuine relationship with these people and try and how do we serve them better so that they can drive more sales on our platform. One of the things that we really have understood is that the access to credit and access to financing for these customers is super important for them to have, for them to unlock sales in the platform. The reason for that is very important is if you look at a medium and small enterprise, they typically have only so much capital. They want to rotate the capital faster so they can get more value for their money. And one of the things that we've been always actively looking at is how do we solve that problem.
Okay.
So, there are various ways to do it. Today, a MSME can go to a financing institution, can provide a loan. So there are acceptable ways of getting access to capital. I think most of them are either inefficient in terms of it is not fast enough, or the MSME does not have a required KYC that is required, or it is expensive.
So what our attempt with this is to essentially look at how can we leverage new age technologies, which is around blockchain, which is around programmable money, and how can we use our connections with our selling partners to provide them access to easier working capital. So that's what we have tried to attempt in this block that you see here.
I'd like to zoom in on the blockchain part of things.
Sure.
How do you incorporate blockchain tokenized payments into this innovation and the solution you're providing for your selling partners?
So let me just give you a quick example of how this is working. So typically today when a selling partner is on any marketplace, Amazon or otherwise, you're waiting for the customer to make a payment. You have to ship the goods out. So there is a delay in the customer making a payment and this payment getting shipped out. Sometimes, the customer may cancel the product, he may not like it. So there is a little bit of a delay in for Amazon or in the marketplace to receive the money and to give it to the merchant. So that period is really critical. The longer that period is, the merchant doesn't have access to the working capital. So if you look at it, it's really Amazon as a payable to the merchant. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to use technology. Maybe what we are here doing is wrapping that payable under a token. So just imagine that you are owed $10,000. There's a token around which it is wrapped and is secured through technology, and that token now can move over a blockchain, right? So Amazon is on the blockchain. The selling partner is on the blockchain, which is a medium and selling enterprise, and a financial institution on the blockchain. So what we do is, while the payment is due from the customer, we'll wrap the token and give it to the merchant.
Wow.
Merchant can then go to an institution like our DBS or a OCBC, say, hey, look, I have a token from Amazon which says that Amazon has to pay me $10,000. Now they will take, let's say, 15 days to pay. Can I get the money from you faster?
Yeah.
So they can go to the bank and say, here's the token. The bank will pay the money ASAP because the token is secure. It is signed by Amazon that Amazon will pay the holder of the token with that $15,000. So they get the access to the capital. They don't need to provide their KYC because it's a secure token. Amazon is guaranteeing that from that. And so they get the working capital faster from the bank, probably at a cheaper rates. And then Amazon settles with the financial partner. So in this way, if you look at it, everybody in the chain benefits.
Right.
We are able to help our selling partners get access to working capital. Selling partner is able to get credit access without having to really provide whole sorts of documentation. So the process is far more efficient, literally real time. And you can actually create an exchange for exchanging these tokens, which then brings down the cost of lending. So you typically would have, unsecured lending is at 7 or 8%. You can probably get it down to much lower.
Okay.
So there's a lot of value, and all of this is happening on a blockchain, which is secure. So the token is moving over the blockchain and helping everybody in the participant in the blockchain.
Do you identify any potential threats, and what are you going to do to mitigate that from happening?
Yeah, I think the threats come from the fact that, how do you ensure that the token is secure? Are you wrapping the token properly? How do you make sure that credentials are being exchanged correctly? How do you make sure that your financial partners are also a willing participant in the ecosystem? So I think there is obviously how do you be more secure and leverage technology to solve for it, but also how do you get the ecosystem around? Because at the end of the day, it is not just Amazon who needs to do this.
Everybody
right? Needs to come together, and the regulators also need to come together to see how this can be managed in a efficient way so that it benefits everyone. So there are various parts of this that have to come together to make it work.
Glad to hear that. Now, we have to talk about AI because that's what everyone's talking about. How do you incorporate AI into your product services and offerings?
Sure. So at our booth, there's something we built called Percept. Percept is a customer analysis tool. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to capture feedback of everybody who is showing up at the booth and interacting at various touch points. And this is not just you transacting, but hey, I like this or I did not like this. All of that is feeding into a machine. The machine is actively looking at it in terms of what is the insight. So, this technology that we built, Percept, can say, hey, this customer is looking for a very specific type of product, which is this kind of one. So we are actively layering AI over or generative AI over the top of the entire transactional process, but also all the feedback mechanisms that are there, whether it's from customers, whether the engagement, and trying to enhance our product and feedback around it. So we believe there is so much value that we can unlock through AI and make our product better and easier.
And that does it for this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia and look us up on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.